Welcome, everyone. My name is Liz Astridge, and I'm really happy to introduce this session. Parvathy is an inspiration on so many levels. She motivates, tells it like it is, advocates, and works tirelessly to help others. Parvathy will answer your questions after her presentation. Please submit questions using the Q&A box located at the bottom of the screen. We will try to get to as many as possible. Parvathy is the Foundation Alliance Manager for Global Genes. She earned her MS from Rutgers University and her clinical training from the Mayo Clinic of Health Sciences. She has worked as a clinical dietitian at Duke University Medical Center and has gained experience in the nonprofit world from her role as a patient engagement advocate in North Carolina. Parvathy is a speaker, panelist, and often serves on national and international efforts to promote patient and caregiver experience. As a mom of two medically complex children, Parvathy is passionate in helping others find their voice and message. She loves sunshine, gardening, and traveling. Thank you for joining us, Parvathy.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that kind introduction. On the offset, thank you guys for inviting me. My apologies with my puppy. Working from home is always interesting. So my apologies for that bark. And we have now two puppies. So again, we'll go flow. As you all know, we're very grateful to have the rare disease community here today because I know you guys really get it. I'm gonna move on and hope that you can see my slides. Just let me know if for some reason you have any confusion or you're not able to hear me. So before I share with you the power of your story, I just wanted to share a little about our story. And I call it our story because I am a rare disease caregiver and mom to two children. So all of what I say is a part of our journey, and those are my little kids there. Well, they were much littler than they are now, but that's Yash and Ira and my other half, Krishnan. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit more about ourselves and what brought me here to you today. So much like all of you, I'm sure at one point, we felt like we got this. We were parents to our son. He was born neurotypical. Life went along. We felt and we envisioned life to be this perfect, just perfect, throwaway. We were just going. And then life as we know it ended up looking like this. We were hit with what started as a diagnostic odyssey for us when our son was 4. Has still not stopped. He's now 13. He just celebrated his 13th birthday. But as you'll learn as I go along with my story, each diagnosis and each turn and each pivot felt like this crash. And that's just what I call our rare disease journey and our rare disease life, which I don't know, maybe some of you may relate to it, maybe some of you won't, but this is how it felt. Our picture perfect roadway of life then started looking like mini crashes all along. To give you a little background, as you can see over the years, what started off as a very sunny, bright, just, walking in the park, doing our thing. Our son was super thrilled to get his first x-ray because that meant not going to school and spending time with mom. So he was very thrilled there to sit there and take an x-ray. And then in 2008, he got diagnosed with colon cancer, and he was 8 at that time. And he, on the very left picture, right after surgery, came out and asked the chief resident in surgery to show him all his cancerous polyps that they took out. From there, we've come a long way. He's had multiple surgeries, and the reason I share his story and the reason I mention this is because, yes, our journey was looking very different because each of his surgeries required care, and we were always a part of the oncology team. But what really changed the landscape for us was that he got all of these cancers because he had a rare disease, and because he had a condition called CMMRD, which is a, long story short, cancer predisposition syndrome. There's something wrong in a particular gene because of which his body does not recognize these abnormal cells, in our case, cancer. And so throughout his lifetime, he'll keep getting different cancers. And one of the most powerful things we had to accept was it is much easier to find a cure or a treatment for his cancer than it ever will be to find a cure or a treatment or an understanding of the actual rare disease that causes all of these cancers. And so while we're very thankful for the pediatric oncology team and the surgery team and all of those teams, we are always going back to the drawing board to ask, what can we do for his rare disease? You know, it manifests itself as all of this, and that is a part of our journey. But our true north, our true finding will be when we have that cure or we have that recognition for the rare disease he has that causes all of this. Believe it or not, until we found out that he had this condition, no one in our family knew that we were carriers for this condition. And now we have 5 adults in our house who are diagnosed with a very, very common condition in the US called Lynch syndrome. And the reason I stand up here and I do these talks and I share this is because 1 in 290 people have Lynch syndrome and most of them are undiagnosed. So it's possible that a lot of other families like ours may have more than one parent with this condition who may end up having a child like Yash, who will have multiple cancers throughout their life. And yet again, it all goes back to it is an ultra rare disease without a cure, without that recognition. As of today, Yash is the only child in the world with this particular homozygous EpCAM mutation that he has. And so our efforts and the reason we share our story is because we want to spread the word, and we want others to know that this is rare to us, but maybe it's this rare because there's not as many people diagnosed in this world as well. But this is a little journey. We've come a long way from his walk in the park to his walk after every surgery. He takes the hit, and it takes him a long, long time to stand back up and walk, but it's a part of our journey, and we've learned to accept it, and we've learned to acknowledge that every single time after every single surgery, we relearn to walk, but it will happen and it can happen. And this is usually a reminder for us. When we take these pictures, it's more for us to remind ourselves that, yes, it's a little deviation, it's a little bump in our road, but we will still stand up and we will still walk again. In 2008, we also had something amazing happen. As we learned and followed our son's journey, we also had Ira. 2014, she was born. She came into our world bright and cheery. She was the complete opposite to my son. My son was more neurotypical. My daughter, as you can see, full of life, was nonverbal. And throughout her journey, she was born with 6 toes and 6 fingers, completely new to us. We had no idea what that meant. We were just very thrilled. We had extra to love. We soon found out that she had a condition called Bardet-Biedl syndrome. We had no idea what that was. We still don't know how she got it. But as you can see, as a little baby, she received physical therapy, and we were opened into this completely new world that we did not know existed. Yes, our son started his medical journey when he was 8. 6 at the diagnostic journey started, and then 8 when he had his first surgery. But when Ira was born, she was not neurotypical. She was nonverbal. She was developmentally delayed. We had to learn how to navigate 2 ends of the spectrum. One child who would not stop talking, and another child who we wished and prayed every day would start talking. So this was her journey through 2014 when she was born with that condition. And then, as you can see, each milestone on her first birthday, we learned that she had an autoimmune condition called opsoclonus myoclonus syndrome. Through her life, as in those 4 years, as she kept growing and developing, she lost a lot of milestones. She moved from learning to walk with a walker, then needing a wheelchair. She also lost a lot of weight, as you can see in that very bottom picture. Most of our life has revolved around being in a hospital or clinic with one or both kids, but through each of her diagnoses, we learned that, it's very unique for our children to have this many diagnoses that we never knew existed until they came into our lives. But with each diagnosis, we met more families, we met more medical teams, and we met different challenges that I'm sure, my child did not have, neither of our children had or have pure, the condition that your kids have. But our children did have many similar journeys or difficulties we as caregivers felt that hopefully many of you could relate to or feel like, yes, we also had that. Like, for instance, we didn't know CAPC existed until our child needed it. You know, we had one child that had surgery while we had another child. At one time, I felt like I was running a mini hospital. This is what life looked like. You know, they both were in the hospital same time, different times, different floors, same floors. We went to clinics together. There was one time I took my son to Boston Children's while my husband took my daughter to Cincinnati Children's. But this is just, and I'm sure I can't see you all, but hopefully none of you have gone through this like we have. But if any of these resonate with you, then just know that you're not alone, and that many of us in this world, there's 7,000 rare diseases, and you know, not each of them are the exact same thing, but our experiences are very similar. And we've learned to go with the flow. And like I said, you know, yes, after the car crash, we just get another car and we keep going on that same journey. And that's just what life has been. In our experience, we've made each of our experiences just a book. All the Places We Go is one of our favorite books, because as a rare disease family, we truly have been to wherever we have had to go to get the care that we have to get. When my daughter was born with Bardet beetle condition, we had absolutely no idea what it was. Our geneticist and genetic counselor gave us some printouts and said, there's no cure, there's nothing we can do. She'll be developmentally delayed. She would most likely go blind as a part of that journey. And we will let you know if there's any clinical trials. Of course, Dr. Google came to our help. We found a specialty clinic in the middle of Marshfield, Wisconsin, where we went, and that was the only center for excellence for Bardet beetle syndrome. Chapel Hill is our home where we live, and so UNC Children's is always very close to our heart. Like I shared earlier, you know, we've gone to all of these other places to get specific care for our children that they need. The reason that Thailand picture is here is because, as you probably are well aware, there's never anything simple when you have a rare child. We wanted to really make it special for our son's 10th birthday, and we said, yes, we can do it. We are going to take you and go for this awesome vacation because he loves traveling. We landed, and on the day he landed, he had a fever. So like, okay, it's not too bad. You have a central line, but it's okay. We got this. And we were called on his 10th birthday. We got admitted into this hospital in the middle of Thailand, where we didn't know the language. We didn't know the healthcare system. We ended up being there for 3 weeks because he had this massive bloodstream infection. And so life as a rare disease is everywhere, every day, every minute, as you all are aware. But I usually like to always share this because it's not simple. It's not easy. It's not, let's pack our bag and go. It's always mapping which hospital is nearest to us and where can we go should there be an emergency. One other thing I always like to add is this weird, I know it looks like a weird picture on the very right, where it says Sick Kids Toronto. As I shared earlier, our child is the only one in the world with this condition, and Sick Kids Toronto, the hospital called Sick Kids, runs the largest research study on this condition. So it's a research lab. They don't do any clinical care, so that's why you don't see a picture of us actually going to the hospital, visiting the hospital. But we wanted to make sure we can do everything we can to support their research, to support whatever it is they're doing. So we took lab tissue samples and blood, and I said, you know what, I will mail them to you. So the day I mailed all of those labs, I made sure I took a picture because it was not normal for me to find a FedEx facility that will mail actual vials of blood to an international research center. But I said, if my children can help in any way, give their blood and tissue samples to help research, then that's what they're going to do. Because, you know, yes, there is no cure right now, there is no treatment, but we always have hope, and that's what keeps us going. Hope for the future, hope for today, but also hope for everybody else who comes after us. And so for me, that including that in all of the presentations I do and the stories I share is important, because it's not how long we live, how well we live, and the legacy that we create both for ourselves as adults, but also for our children. And so I know that they are always going to be there in that lab with their tissue samples and blood, helping generations to come fight this condition. So why share your story? This is why I share my story. The very top picture left of my daughter celebrating her 4th birthday. 2 weeks after that picture was taken, she passed away due to multiple medical complex, conditions. We did 4 months of hospice. We went through palliative care, and we did what we had to do to take care of her. But we realized through our journey with both of them that there are not very many people who look like us, from where we're from, who share their story or who share the journey. And where we live in a very Asian concentrated kind of, place. So we said, there are many others like us who may not come forward to share their story. We want to share the story for them, but we also want to make our community aware that this exists and that we stay in a hospital much more than we stay at home. And so in honor of our daughter and to continue the struggle that our son goes through in his medical journey, we started a toy drive during Diwali, which is our big holiday. And we said, this is one way for us to give back to the community that helps us so much, the medical community, but it's also a way to show our community that hospital life is 24/7 for some families, and unless you actually do something about it or share your story or help us or help others like us, we need the community as much as the community needs us. So we do a lot of Ronald McDonald House meals. We support the hospital school, as you're aware. So that's us doing Kindles. Our drive has grown bigger and bigger. And in our small way, we feel like we're advocating and we're sharing our story. And the reason I come back to this is because what we didn't know at that time, where this will take us, but we were very strong that we are in this for a reason. And for us, it was very important as a family to find that reason and to find out our purpose and to create our children's legacy along with creating our own. And one of the ways we decided to do that is by sharing our story. Through that, I want to share this, always I hear like, oh, you're an advocate or you're this or you're that. And I just want to say, everybody is an advocate. Anyone can be an advocate. And the actual definition of an advocate is basically one who shares their story or promotes what it is for a certain cause. And so this is, if you search this is the definition of an advocate. To me, who's an advocate? You're an advocate. Anyone can be an advocate. If you care for someone or if you're in this journey, you become an advocate. Who do we advocate for? We advocate, and who do we advocate to? For me, it's always important. I was fortunate enough to have this opportunity to come and talk to all of you about advocacy, but in reality, you're doing this every single day. When you go to your doctor's office, when you're talking to other parents who are in this journey, when you're talking to your community, when you're talking to this random person in the grocery store who asks, how's your child? You're advocating because you're saying, you know what? Let me share my story so I can educate one person about what this condition is. God knows we advocate to the insurance company all the time, Advocacy can be local, it can be state level. If you're doing Rare Across America, you are advocating for your child, you're advocating for your community. You can do it on a national level. You can basically advocate everywhere at any time. And why do we advocate? Well, I advocate for my 2 children, and I'm sure all of you have a reason or a calling for advocacy. So no matter what kind of advocacy you do, please know that you are taking that cause one step further. And that is the most important part of what you're doing. You're sharing what you do with the rest of the world. So you don't, it's not like you have to be on stage or you're welcome to. And I think that's great if you feel like you should, but if you're posting on Facebook or you're posting on Instagram, or you're posting or you're sharing, or you're walking into a clinic and you're telling that nurse what that condition is, you're advocating. For me, I advocate for both of these children, but I also advocate for everybody else who don't want to advocate or who don't know how to advocate or who are not able to advocate. We make the most of it. For me, advocacy is not just talking to our community, but it's talking to everyone through our journey. We've done, we've spoken to industry, which I feel like is as important as talking to other families. Why is this important to me? Is, this is not an industry that's working on a drug for my child, but for me, it's extremely important that industry knows how it is to live with rare disease, what really matters to rare disease families, because a lot of times they're in it for the right reasons, but they don't know what families really go through. They don't know what patients really go through. So that very bottom thing is just when I presented for Rare Disease Day at our local, industry partner. And I was like, hey, are you celebrating Rare Disease Day? And they're like, yes. I said, do you need a patient advocate? Because really, how can you say you're celebrating rare disease without actually having a patient or a caregiver or an advocate share their stories? So that's what we did. There's my son during pandemic, doing his Alex's lemonade stand because we felt really helpless. A lot of our lives changed during the pandemic. So we said we'll just socially distance. We do what we can to spread the word. I shared during the FDA open public comment this year for Rare Disease Day. We shared our story and we shared why it's important for families to be called upon to ask, to ask and share our journey. We worked with other rare disease parents locally. We shared to the news about how caregivers are not considered unpaid healthcare workers, because of which we were not initially qualified to receive the COVID vaccine. So there was a huge movement in the state of North Carolina, and we moved from not being recognized to then being recognized and being in that group one to get that COVID vaccine. So sometimes it's not just about the condition my child has, but it's about just rallying together the troops to do what we have to do for the entire community, because in the end, it also helps us as a family or us as people. Very recently, through the work that we do with Sick Kids Toronto, where they run the largest consortium, where we saw that they needed patients and advocates to share what it is that they need to focus on research. And so I was honored to be invited to be a part of that research program, research advisory board. The landscape is changing. It's very frustrating when we're sitting in the hospital room or when we're sitting with that doctor's office about how can I change my world? How can I make it better for our children? The answer is you're already doing it by caring for them, by sharing their story, by advocating. Just know that I didn't get to this point today. It wasn't like we were diagnosed yesterday and this happened today. We started our journey in 2008 when my son was born. Things changed when our daughter was born. It has taken a long time for us to even realize, okay, what do we want? How can we do it? But just know that every single time I was sharing my story, it got heard. It rang a bell somewhere with someone, and I can guarantee you are already doing it and you have already made that difference. But hopefully after listening to my story, you can advertise your story differently or recognize that you're doing it every single day and taking it to the next step if that's something you choose to do. This is something I always share because a lot of physicians or medical teams, when I talk to hospitals or insurance and stuff, medical students or even some advocates don't realize the journey we as a family go through. This is a program called Beads of Courage. So if you've not heard of it, please reach out to your local hospital and ask them to become a Beads of Courage facility. We were fortunate to start this because we were in the oncology side, but then we spread the word and we were like, oh my God, why should it only be the oncology team? The specialty team, the genetics team, the rare disease team, the surgery team, everybody should be doing this program. But each of these beads signify a physical therapy or a doctor's visit or a poke or a prod or a hospital stay. And to me, it's not a journey just that your child takes, but each of this also shows the struggle that you take through this journey with your children or with your adult, patients. So my thing is, if it's not there, start the program because it's impactful for us to just take a step back and see all of the struggles that our children have gone through or we as caregivers have gone through. And so I always say, the picture on the left was from 2 years ago. My son has about 200 more beads since then. But the picture on the right after our daughter passed away, her fifth birthday, when she would have started kindergarten, she wasn't there with us, so I took her beads of courage, and I took this replica of a doll that was made, and I took it in front of the elementary school that she would have attended had she been with us. And so for me, her courage doesn't end. Her beads of courage continue to live with us and grow with us and share with us everything that she's been through. But Global Genes is the organization I've worked for. You can follow it's an organization that supports all rare diseases. As a Foundation Alliance manager, I manage all foundations that have rare diseases that are in our alliance. We have about 800 organizations. I just feel like until all 7,000 have a organization to represent their disease, our journey never ends. But I was so fortunate to meet with Amanda from Cura Foundation for that. And from all of my interactions with everybody in your planning committee and your exec team, I can tell you that you have a phenomenal team of advocates already leading the way. If there's any way that you can share your story to support the overall cause and overall direction that the foundation and you want to go for your children, then I hope that you can share your story in many different ways to support all of the advocacy training and all of the ways in which they're trying to advocate for this community. Then I think that would be extremely impactful, because end of the day, your story matters no matter what. No one else, even within your own group, no one else shares your personal story. And so I hope that this will be your chance to know that your story matters, your story counts, and the experience that you have are extremely unique, and the world needs to know it so that it can be a better place. That's my story for you.
Thank you so much, Parvati. That was so powerful, and we appreciate you sharing it with us today. So now we can take some questions. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. And while we're waiting, I just am curious, and I think probably a lot of people wonder this too, is how you and other advocates find the time and motivation to do everything you need for your child.
So child comes first. So if anything is happening with him, of course, we drop everything and we go take care of that. But it's quite interesting. The very first time I did something that I felt like was outside just caring for our children was when we had this really, really, really long hospital stay. I think about 3 months almost. And there were, and no hospital is perfect, no medical system's perfect, not every day. In 3 months, and we had many days of ups and downs, of frustrations. And then one fine day, I was like, okay, I have seen this happen so many times during our hospitalization that it's not just, I don't want to complain, I want change. And so the first time that rang the bell was, okay, how can we implement this change? How do we make sure this does not happen to anybody else? So I decided to go to patient services or something. And then I said, I want to be more involved. I want to do something. I don't want to just complain that something's happened, and so I didn't want them to perceive me as this train wreck problem parent who's, complaining. I was like, I don't want to complain. I think I have a solution. And so that's the first time I was introduced to the Patient Family Advisory Board. This was like 7 years ago at UNC Children's. And they said, well, here's a board of parents and advocates and nurses and doctors. You're welcome to go join the board and do that. And so I was like, fine, I'll do it. And then, believe it or not, the next 3 meetings that the board had, we were still in the hospital. So I went to that board meeting in my pajamas or looking like a train wreck like I do after 4 months in the hospital. And I walked up and I said, this is the problem. This is not a new problem. This is the solution I propose. And it took a while, and then I ended up being on the board, but then I saw that there were so many people who really wanted to make that difference. And so I said, fine, I will do that. And then I once a month meetings, I went for it. And then now 6 years later, I'm the chair of that Patient Family Advisory Board. But it just sparked that need. Like, I don't want to complain. I really want that change. And so I feel like that can happen sometimes organically like this and sometimes on purpose, because we learned that our insurance doesn't cover this clinic in Marshfield, Wisconsin. So, we were like, fine, but we still want to take our child there. It's fighting for that insurance. And it's literally doing whatever you're doing every single day, but changing the way you do it to be more emphatic and be more, okay, I'm done with being the person complaining about the problem and just thinking, okay, what if I could help, what would be the solution? So I would look at it that way.
Okay. So you were talking about this 3-4 month hospital stay. How do you think we could continue to improve the quality of our life for ourselves and our families, especially when your child is hospitalized? Like, how can we make that experience better?
So I hate the word self-care because that's like telling a new parent who's had a newborn, like, oh, sleep when the child sleeps. Like, who's going to do laundry and food and everything else? Like, that's just impossible. So anybody who says that either doesn't have a child or definitely doesn't have a rare disease child. But honestly, for me, I've realized that I needed an outlet in all of those months of being in the hospital. And we've done this for so long now. And ours is more like most rare diseases. It's a chronic condition, like we have ups and we have downs. And so we literally plan a lot. We it's taken a long time and it will continue. It's always a learning experience, but of course, this was different when we had both kids in the hospital. It wasn't like who had time to go to self-care, And so sometimes it was just letting go of that control or acknowledging that I can't do this today. And trusting your spouse or your partner or your adult friend who can just say, okay, come here for an hour, just be here. And I would just go to Starbucks and drink coffee and then come back. And like, it just was at work. At some points it was like, okay, I can't go too far because my child's too sick. But at the same time, if I don't do this, I may drive them crazy or I may go crazy myself. So just acknowledging that. We're all human, and the power of caregiving is exhausting, exhilarating, and just extreme stress. We all have chronic traumatic stress disorder because we're all worried about that next scan or, what if something goes wrong? And it's not easy, but, like for instance, this is, when I have very tough meetings, I have this right here and I have to focus on that meeting. So I have learned that I can color and focus better. And it's like taking that stress level just one notch down to just saying, okay, I obviously cannot take off from work and just take a mental health day like they all say we should. But I can find that pocket of time to do that one thing that helps me. Oh, that's such a great question. I can tell you from my experience, so our son was born, he was perfect, well, close to perfect, at least now when I look back, I'm like, life was so much perfect at that time when we didn't have all these problems. So his diagnostic odyssey started when he was 6. And I can tell you, if our daughter was born first, we probably would not have had another kid because she was born with a condition, which is how most of it was. But I have a very funny story to share with you to show you how far along we have come. And this hopefully will give you an insight into how we were before to how we are now. So my son had a lot of ear infections when he was a baby. And so I think at like 10 months or something, they were so tired. They were like, oh, he needs ear tubes. I printed out about 10 documents that talked about anesthesia and the effect it may have on your child's IQ. And I took it to the ENT doctor. I was like, I have to meet the doctor. I took it to the doctor and I said, I need 30 minutes to talk to this doctor because, they're going to give anesthesia to my son to put a ear tube. And then I told him, I was like, I'm so worried, it's going to affect his IQ and what's going to happen. There's going to be anesthesia. We laughed so hard now thinking of how I would have looked to the doctor then. My child has 12-hour surgeries. And now I'm like, can we just do something so that it can make his life better? And we then did MRIs with our little one when she was 6 months old, for which she had to be sedated. At that point I was like, yes, please give it to them, do what you have to do to keep them sane. But now looking back, it teaches me that they all added up. It's not something we signed up for, and we do the best we can. So whether if this is your first child and you're going with this, or you've had many children, but this is your first rare disease child, just acknowledging that it's a shitty ride, pardon my French, it's not something we were trained to do. There's no book that comes with it. So just, your family's always, at least, most people don't know what it means to have a chronic illness. And so they're like, oh, how's it going now? Like, sometimes I'm like, it's still the same, nothing's changed. My child still has cancer, or just learning that most people don't get it. They just don't get it. And giving yourself that grace to either have the time to explain to them that this is why it's always going to be like this, because I felt like a lot of times it was more exhausting to repeat my story again and again. And so we created a blog. We do a lot on Instagram. We post a lot just because I was like, okay, I need an outlet to channelize our story so that I don't feel like I'm being told, how is this not getting better? Like, you're in this for 7 years and you still have this. It was almost because they didn't know what the condition was. They didn't realize what it meant. And so whatever your way is, if you journal or if you blog or if you write or if you talk, finding that way to keep yourself sane through the process, for me, helps the most. And so I do a lot of talking through my pictures, as you can see. So I take a ton of pictures because it not just helps me curate our life, but it also helps me share the reality of what we're going through. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but my suggestion would be find an outlet that you're comfortable with to share how you feel going through this, not what your child's going through, not what the society thinks you should be feeling or doing or saying, or, whatever it is that's comfortable to you, find a way to do that. Oh, of course, I am an open book. I would be happy to talk about, just give me 1 second to read the question.
Here, I'll read it out loud so that everyone can see. Sure. So the question is, can you talk about how you address the financial challenges of caring for kids, dropping everything when things go south, needing to change a career or job, finding grants, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. Clearly, as you heard in the introduction, I now feel like my previous life, because it just seems so far before. I used to work in a hospital. I was a clinical dietitian. I worked in pediatrics with bone marrow transplants. Life's come a full circle. I stopped working pediatrics after my daughter felt really ill. And I said, I think I have a mini hospital in my house. I don't think I need any more clinical experience in a hospital. But I feel like most of the times, in our case, we're blessed that my husband can never quit his job because our insurance is tied with him. So, we can have a whole presentation on what it is to carry that onus of having the insurance and having to stay in that job and do your best while you have 2 very sick children. So I was always the hospital mom. I always permanently lived there because, or took my children to the hospital. My daughter we had to drive to Charlotte, which is about 2.5 hours from where we live, about 1 to 2 times a week. So I did that. Then I would come back. Basically, I was just like their manager. I still am. Feels like I'm like their medical manager. I would always say, okay, at this time we go to this hospital, at this time we go to that hospital. We're very fortunate. I should tell you, there's no lying in this. We're very fortunate that he has been able to stay in that job, that understands that we will have to drop everything and go. We when it comes to your child dying or your child being extremely sick, my daughter had a very bad bleeding disorder. So at sometimes it would just spontaneously start bleeding from her lines. And so that just meant we had to put pressure and then take her to the nearest emergency. Obviously work was not something that I could do. So we did change our entire lifestyle. It became about, okay, we have to eat. We have to care for our children. We need insurance. And we need to always make sure we're near a hospital. I know, and I say this knowing that there are a lot of families who don't have that. There are single parents, there are parents who are not together anymore because of rare diseases, but having that tribe that understands, and we've been at this again for 7 years now, we now finally have friends who really get it. For the longest time, we didn't have plants in our house. For the longest time, we didn't have pets in our house because it was like, how, we also have to pay these house bills while we're living in the hospital for 4 or 5 months at a time with 2 different children. We didn't have anything. We minimalized everything that we did in our life. Some of the costs that people don't count are the parking passes or eating. It just adds up. It adds up. At one point, we were like, not parking in the hospital anymore. My husband would drop me and then he would come and pick me up when we were getting discharged. We just didn't use the car for all those days because it adds up. It's a huge lifestyle change. But I will tell you, we have received help now from organizations that help us fly to, we live in North Carolina, so we have to fly to Boston for my child's care. We realized and we learned it was very hard because we were trying so hard to be self-sufficient that we didn't give ourselves that grace to say, okay, you know what, we should ask others for help if they are available or possible. And when we did that, we're still very careful because we know we're more lucky than others. But there was a point, and there is a point, he was in a clinical trial for which we had to go every 3 weeks. Through the pandemic, we drove. We drove every 3 weeks to Boston, about 12 to 14 hours. We wouldn't stop anywhere. And we did work. We both worked while we drove with a hotspot, and we just made the changes we had to make. And we can't take off, but we did let let our employers know that we're on the road, and having that conversation, and knowing that I can only work for places where I don't have to show up in a hospital. I can never work in a hospital again because I know that I loved my job and I loved being there, and I loved actually being in the clinical world, but acknowledging and accepting that I will never be able to do that because you can't take off if you're working in a hospital. You can't just say, well, I'm not showing up to take care of my patients. Acknowledging that and understanding that working in the rare disease space and using our experience to share what others have became my calling. So one of us had to find a job that called to our heart, and the other has continued to call to insurance and keep that down. And again, we're blessed and fortunate in all of this to have that. But if there are grants to help, then you should absolutely ask for it. There's no reason why you shouldn't. I don't know if I answered your question directly, but I tried.
Okay, so one question. So you mentioned that Diwali toy drive that you did. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the importance about how this helps educate others about rare diseases?
Yeah, so every year we have this huge video presentation that we do. Like, we just put together a montage of everything that we've gone through in the year in the hospital. Because what I realized was there's this amazing organization, and I don't remember who they are, but they do Christmas in July. If you're in the hospital ever, I hope you're not, but if you are, like us, it all started, this is how it started for us. In July, we were there 1 July. My daughter didn't get presents and stuff here. She just played with the wrapper. But our son was there, and they came and gave him a gift. And he said, it's so nice. Someone somewhere, a complete stranger, thought about us and felt like they should do something nice for us. And it made me feel really bad because I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, there's no reason why someone should come and give you a gift in July and say Christmas in July. And they did. But I realized, and I'll be very honest, at least until then, I did not see my community or our community do anything like that for Diwali. And historically, it's a holiday that you share presents and you do gifts, and just like Christmas is here. And so I felt like, okay, how can we, so there's 2 parts. How can we share our story to let people know in our community, if they're looking for a way to give, then, please give this. We only do a toy drive. It's a new toy they send us, and then we collect it. And then now it's become like national. We share the link and people support our toy drive for the hospital because we're giving back to the place where we give back. But the other thing was, we realized quite early on that there were not a lot of people who looked like us, so who were on that stage from in South Asian heritage sharing their stories. So I felt like are there not other Indians like us who have a rare disease? Like, are we the only ones? Clearly that's not the case, because, you know, I was not born here. So I was like, okay, we don't have a Caucasian gene all of a sudden to have this. So there must be others in our community that have a rare disease that is not being shared. And so we felt like, fine, those token patients from this community that are sharing our story and that are doing what we have to do. So we make videos to share about our journey, and we definitely share it in blogs. We don't have an organization for this particular syndrome, so we partner with Colon Cancer Coalition, or we partner with Alex's Lemonade Stand, and we do share our story on their platforms because it's a much larger platform. And if you're going to Alex's Lemonade Stand and you saw my son, you would see that there's not many others like him that are there. And so we made a conscious effort to share our story and our pictures and all of that to showcase both the underserved and minority population that we're from, but also to showcase to the researchers and the industry people, like, okay, we are there, you know, so don't count us out when you're doing research and when you're doing these studies and all of that. So that's one of the reasons we started the toy drive.
Okay, I have another question here. I feel like we live in survival mode, and that is hard, but not as hard as it could be. There is always someone that has a worse situation, so I always try to be grateful, but sometimes I break down because people ask ignorant questions, such as, do you think he'll grow out of it? So my question is, how do you help people, family, friends, and community understand this is our life? My son is not sick. This is who he is. Who can I help people understand we need to live in this world, not expect him to live in our normal world?
Oh my God, you should just share your story and this entire thing in a video to the Pura Foundation, and they can put it up on their website, and then you should have a card. So I kid you not. And I learned this from another mom. We're all learning from each other. You know, it is a hard world. Sometimes I tell people and they just look at me like I'm crazy. I tell them, I said, the medical part, I got it. I can help my child through the medical stuff. The stuff I have the hardest time dealing with is all like the mental health issues or the social impact of missing 2-3 years of school in a developing child, or IEP or 504 or whatever else, you know, private school, public school. I'm just like, it is so overwhelming to explain the story. At the beginning of the school year, I write out this saga to all the teachers, and I copy them all on it because I'm like, you know what? I learned very hard. I'm like, otherwise each teacher was sending me an email. Well, Josh just missed school today. Everything okay? And then there are times he's going to miss weeks of school. It took a lot. And then finally I was like, fine, I get it. I'm going to just make this email. It's going to be long. I'm going to be that mom. But I would say find a platform to share your story and share that it's okay to be different. It's just a new normal. It's not, you know, people now like, oh, you shouldn't use the word disabled, or you shouldn't use, you know, they're trying to help. They don't know how to help. It's okay for my child to be disabled. It is not okay for you to treat him differently. It is not okay for you to, you know, ask me questions like, will he grow out of it? For me personally, it's exhausting, but I take it as a call to action to say, fine, you know what? You're my family. If you don't get it, I cannot explain it to the rest of the world. So let me start with you. So we literally took a class, very simple one-on-one class to our parents to say, this is never going to end until his rare disease is fixed. Because, you know, after each surgery or after each cancer, they were like, oh, is it over? Like, this is great. Life will go back to normal. Like, no, he still has a rare disease that causes a cancer. So until that's fixed, it's not going to get fixed. And so for me, it was like, it started as this nucleus of explaining to our family, and then, you know, to your community or church, or, you know, have a day at church where you're just standing up and talking about this condition. Or if you're not comfortable talking up on stage, then doing it over, you know, mom's tea or something like that. You know, if you feel strongly about it, saying it and sharing it just the way you shared it right now is so powerful, because a lot of times people don't get it. So they think they're trying to help. And sometimes what they're saying is actually worse than if they didn't say anything.
Okay, we have one more comment and then we'll wrap up. We have, thank you for sharing your story. It's really helpful to put this experience of raising a child with a rare disease in perspective. Thank you for being so strong and brave.
I am no different from all of you. You all are strong and brave. None of us chose the strong life. I told someone the other day, I was like, I'd rather be weak. It's so easy being weak. We didn't sign up for this, but you know what? Who would ever want to sign up for such an exciting life? It's just, we were just blessed to have this, and it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, but we make the most of it, and just know that you are already advocating, you are already sharing your story. It's just knowing that you're doing it with purpose and acknowledging that it's very hard. I had a mom once give me a, it's like, you know how you have one of these cards, where these are called, like you're with that child's condition, and a website that said, learn more about me there. And she wanted me to share this with whoever else. I was like, that was brilliant. It was so brilliant. I was like, man, that's something, because, you know, not only did she just say, I don't want to talk to you about my child right now, and she didn't do that for me, but she said, this is what she does as an example of what she does to other strangers in the grocery store who look at her weirdly or have that same question. So find your channel, find a way to share your story, find a way to empower yourself for the hard work that you're already doing.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining. If you missed any of this presentation, it will be posted on our website. We have a full afternoon of sessions and hope you will join. Our next session is the Introduction to Epilepsy at 1:30 p.m. And then we'll have the Pure-Related Development and Epileptic Encephalopathy, and we'll meet live with Professor Leventer, Dr. Johansson, and Dr. Roboli for a panel to answer your questions. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next sessions.